When you think about great poetry that has influenced American culture, you might think of Edgar Allan Poe, Walt Whitman, or Maya Angelou. But few would have guessed that poetry by a Muslim poet from the 13th century would be the best-selling poet in America over 800 years after his death. Jalaluddin Rumi was a Muslim scholar who was born in the year 1207 to a very elite family in Persia. In order to escape the Mongol invasion of Persia, his family traveled west to Konya, Turkey. His father sent Rumi to study Islamic law in Damascus, Syria. When Rumi returned to Konya, he continued to study law, but an encounter with an interesting character named Shams Tabrizi changed his life. One version of the story of how Rumi and Shams met describes a setting in a marketplace. Rumi was reading some books and Shams asked him what he was reading. Rumi took one look at the seemingly low-life character and replied, "Something that you do not understand." Suddenly, Shams knocked Rumi's books into a puddle of water, but when Rumi ran to rescue them, he was surprised that they were dry. When Rumi asked how this happened, Shams replied, "This is something you do not understand." Rumi felt that his encounter with Shams was an answer to a prayer he had made to God to send him a teacher. Shams had such an uncanny ability to intrigue Rumi with intellectual questions that Rumi developed a deep friendship with him and stayed with him for 40 days learning about mysticism. A few years later, his dear friend Shams suddenly disappeared. Some suspected that he was murdered by those who were close to Rumi because his family did not approve of Rumi's friendship with such a low-class character. Others claim Shams may have disappeared to teach Rumi the importance of longing. Shams's disappearance was agonizing for Rumi, and his longing for Shams's company was a source of much of his poetry. The unlikely friendship between Shams and Rumi has intrigued many for years to come. Rumi's greatest work was called the Masnavi. The nearly 50,000 lines of this piece of poetry encompass a message of devotion and illuminate a path toward oneness with God. The Masnavi describes love as a yearning that comes from separation, the greatest separation always being our separation from God. Rumi wanted us to realize that our strength to resist despair lies in our self-development and spiritual growth. Over the years, Rumi was able to blend the spiritual side of Islam that he learned through mysticism with the Islamic law that he learned in Syria to encourage more religious tolerance. Rumi wrote most of his poetry in Persian, but also wrote some in Arabic, Turkish, and Greek. To him, poetry was a way to connect with people. Over the years, many have tried to translate Rumi's works into various Western languages. Rumi's messages were so powerful that they have transcended languages, cultures, ethnic divisions, and religions. One French scholar by the name Eva de Vitre-Meyerovich, who translated his poems into French, announced that she converted to Islam through her study of Rumi's poetry. Upon her death, she requested that she be buried near Rumi's mausoleum in Turkey. In 2014, Coleman Barks, the translator who gave Rumi's work a more American flair, was able to create 22 volumes of Rumi's work in English. Harper One publishers report that they have sold over 2 million copies of these works, which have been translated into 23 languages. Today, people all over the world honor Rumi by recognizing December 17, the day of his death, with events that feature whirling dervishes and recitations of his poetry. There is no shortage of Rumi fans all over the world, even in the most unlikely places like America. Barks remarks that the recent appeal to Rumi's message reflects a global movement to dissolve the boundaries created by religious sectarianism. Perhaps the unlikely friendship of Rumi and Shams is an analogy of the unlikely connection that Americans find in Islam through Rumi's poetry.